The lumberjack saved her from chains. At dusk, she knelt and asked to stay forever. Welcome back to our channel, where untold stories of the American frontier come to life. Before we begin this incredible tale of courage, redemption, and unexpected love, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss any of our captivating Western stories. And here's something special. We want to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below telling us your city and country. Are you listening from the bustling streets of New York, the quiet countryside of Texas, or maybe somewhere across the ocean? We love connecting with our global family of story lovers. Now, settle in as we transport you to the rugged Colorado territory of 1887, where the sound of axes echoed through pine forests, and where one man's act of kindness would change two lives forever. Chapter 1. The Sound of Chains. The morning mist clung to the towering pines of the Colorado Rockies like ghostly fingers, reluctant to release their hold as the sun climbed higher. Tom Mackenzie wiped the sweat from his weathered brow, his calloused hands gripping the worn handle of his double-bit axe. At 32 years, he had spent the better part of a decade working these mountains, cutting timber for the Denver Pacific Railroad that snaked its way through the wilderness. The rhythmic thud of his axe against pine bark echoed through the forest, a sound as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. Tom worked alone by choice. Most of the other lumberjacks preferred the camaraderie of the logging camps, but he found peace in the solitude of the towering trees and mountain air. It was the unusual sound that made him pause mid-swing. Clank, clank, clank. Metal against metal, accompanied by what sounded like sobbing. Tom lowered his axe, his keen blue eyes scanning the dense undergrowth. Years of working in bear country had honed his senses, and every instinct told him something was wrong. The sound came again, fainter now, from somewhere deeper in the forest. Following a barely visible game trail, Tom pushed through the thick brush, his boots silent on the carpet of pine needles. The metallic clanking grew louder, and with it, the unmistakable sound of human distress. What he found in a small clearing made his blood run cold. A young woman, no more than 25, sat huddled against a massive boulder. Heavy iron shackles bound her wrists and ankles, the chains that connected them staked deep into the rocky ground. Her dress, once probably blue calico, was torn and filthy. Dark hair hung in tangled strands around a face marked by exhaustion and fear. But it was her eyes that struck him most, large, brown eyes that held a mixture of terror and a desperate, fading hope. "Dear God," Tom breathed, dropping his axe and rushing forward. The woman's head snapped up at his approach, and she pressed herself harder against the rock, fear evident in every line of her body. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "Please don't hurt me anymore." Tom stopped immediately, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "Ma'am, I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Thomas Mackenzie. I'm going to help you." He could see the conflict in her eyes, the desperate need to trust warring with learned caution. Slowly, carefully, he knelt a few feet away from her, making himself less intimidating. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Elena," she stammered. "Elena Rodriguez." The slight accent in her voice suggested Spanish heritage, not uncommon in this part of Colorado, where Mexican and American cultures often blended. "Elena, can you tell me who did this to you?" Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "The Brennan gang. They took me from my family's ranch 3 days ago. Said they were going to sell me to—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but Tom understood. The Brennan gang. Tom knew the name. A notorious group of outlaws who controlled much of the illegal trade through the mountain passes. Human trafficking was just one of their deplorable enterprises. "They chained me here while they went to arrange the sale," Eleanor continued, her voice barely audible. "They said they'd be back by nightfall." Tom glanced at the sun, now approaching its zenith. That gave them perhaps 6 hours before the gang returned. "Elena, I'm going to get you out of here," Tom said firmly. "But I need to get some tools to break these chains. My cabin isn't far. Can you hang on a little longer?" She nodded quickly, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time. Tom stood and retrieved his axe. "I'll be back within the hour, I promise. If anyone comes before I return, you make as much noise as you can with those chains. I'll hear you." As he turned to leave, Eleanor called out softly, Why? Why are you helping me? Tom paused, looking back at her. Because it's the right thing to do, Mum, and because no human being deserves to be treated like property. With that, he disappeared into the forest, his long strides eating up the distance to his cabin. Behind him, Elena Rodriguez sat in her chains, clinging to the first real hope she'd felt in days. The sound of his axe had led him to her, but Tom Mackenzie had no idea that saving Elena Rodriguez would change the entire course of his life. Chapter 2. Race Against Time. Tom's boots pounded against the forest floor as he navigated the familiar trail to his cabin. His mind raced faster than his feet, calculating what he'd need and how much time he had. The sun was already past its peak, and mountain shadows were beginning to lengthen. His cabin sat in a small clearing he'd carved out himself, a modest structure of hewn logs with a stone chimney that now stood cold in the summer heat. Tom burst through the door and immediately went to his tool collection. Heavy sledgehammer, iron wedges, his best chisel set, anything that might break through iron shackles forged to hold a person captive. As he gathered the tools, his thoughts kept returning to Elena's face, the terror in her eyes, yes, but also something else, a strength that hadn't been completely broken despite her ordeal. 3 days in chains, at the mercy of the Brennan gang, and she was still fighting. Tom had heard whispers about the gang's human trafficking operation. Young women, mostly Mexican or Indian, disappearing from remote ranches and settlements. The authorities either couldn't or wouldn't do anything about it. The Brennans had too much money and too many connections in Denver. He wrapped the tools in a canvas tarp, slinging the bundle over his shoulder. Before leaving, he grabbed his rifle, a Winchester .44-40 that had saved his life more than once in these mountains. If the Brennan gang returned early, he intended to be ready. The return journey felt longer, weighted down with tools and the growing urgency of the setting sun. When he finally reached the clearing, Elena looked up with such relief that it nearly broke his heart. "You came back," she whispered. "I gave you my word," Tom replied simply, setting down his tools. "Now let's get you free." He examined the shackles more closely. They were well made, professional grade, the kind used in territorial prisons. The chains were anchored to iron spikes driven deep into the rocky ground. "This might be loud," Tom warned, positioning his chisel against the first chain link, "but these mountains swallow sound pretty well." Elena nodded. "Do whatever you must." The first blow of the sledgehammer rang out like a bell, sending vibrations up Tom's arms. The chain held. He repositioned and struck again and again. "Tell me about your family," Tom said between strikes, trying to keep Elena's mind off the noise and their precarious situation. "We have a small ranch," Elena said, wincing as another blow rang out. "My father raises cattle, my mother tends the garden. I have 2 younger brothers, Miguel and Carlos." Her voice softened. "They must be so worried. Where's your ranch?" "About 30 miles southeast, in the valley near Pueblo. The Brennans came at dawn. My father and brothers were out checking the herd." Her voice broke. "I pray they're still alive." Tom paused in his hammering. "The Brennans didn't kill them." "No, they said dead ranchers bring too much attention from the law. They just wanted me." She looked away. "Said I was prime merchandise cunt for their buyers in Santa Fe." Rage flared in Tom's chest, but he channeled it into his next swing. The chain link finally gave way with a sharp crack. "One down," he muttered, moving to the next chain. As he worked, Elena studied his profile. He was a large man, tall and broad-shouldered from years of heavy labor, but his hands were gentle when he checked that the broken chain hadn't cut her wrist. His face was weathered from sun and wind, with kind blue eyes and sandy brown hair that needed cutting. "You live out here alone?" she asked. "Have for about 8 years now. Came out from Ohio after the war." He didn't elaborate, and Eleanor sensed there was more to that story. The second chain proved more stubborn. As Tom worked, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool mountain air, Eleanor found herself studying his movements. There was something almost meditative about the way he worked, methodical, patient, determined. "Why lumberjacking?" she asked, partly to distract herself from the ringing blows and partly because she was genuinely curious about this man who had risked his own safety to help a stranger. "Trees don't lie," Tom said simply, landing another blow. They don't cheat or steal or hurt people for pleasure. You treat them with respect. They provide what you need. It's honest work." The chain finally snapped. Eleanor gasped in relief as the weight fell away from her ankles. "Now for your hands," Tom said. But as he positioned his tools, a new sound echoed through the forest. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, approaching fast. Tom's blood turned to ice. He grabbed his rifle and checked the chamber. "They're early," Elena whispered, terror flooding back into her voice. "How many of them are there?" "5, maybe 6. Tom looked at the remaining shackles on her wrists. No time to break them properly. He made a quick decision. "Elena, listen to me carefully. I'm going to break the chain between your wrists, but the shackles will have to stay for now. Can you run with them on?" She nodded quickly. Tom positioned his chisel and brought the hammer down with all his strength. The chain parted on the second blow. "Stay low and follow me," he whispered urgently. "We're going deeper into the forest." As they gathered the tools and prepared to flee, the sound of approaching horses grew louder. Rough voices echoed through the trees. The Brennan gang had returned for their captive, and they were going to find her gone. Chapter 3. Into the Wilderness. "She's gone. The chains are broken." The angry roar echoed through the forest, followed by a string of curses that made Elena flinch even from their hiding spot 50 yards away. Tom pressed a finger to his lips and gestured for Elena to follow him deeper into the dense undergrowth. The iron shackles still encircling her wrists caught on branches as they moved, but she bit back any sound of pain or frustration. "Spread out," another voice commanded, deeper, more authoritative. That would be Jake Brennan himself, Tom realized. The gang leader had a reputation for ruthless intelligence. Check for tracks. Someone helped her. Those chains didn't break themselves. Tom led Elena along a game trail so faint it was nearly invisible, his years in these mountains guiding them through terrain that would challenge even experienced outdoorsmen. Behind them, the sounds of the search grew more organized, more methodical. "Look for blood," Brennan's voice carried through the trees. "She's probably cut up from those shackles. And find out who's been working in this area. I want to know who interfered with my business." Eleanor stumbled as her shackles caught on a fallen log. Tom immediately steadied her, his large hand gentle but firm on her arm. "I'm slowing you down," she whispered, despair creeping into her voice. "You should leave me and save yourself." Tom stopped and turned to face her, his blue eyes intense. "Elena Rodriguez, I didn't risk my life to free you just to abandon you now. We're in this together." Something in his tone, the absolute certainty of it, sent warmth through Eleanor's chest, despite their desperate situation. When was the last time someone had protected her so fiercely? Her father loved her, certainly, but this was different. This was a man choosing to stand with her against overwhelming odds. "There!" a shout from behind them, too close for comfort. "Fresh tracks heading north." Tom grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her into a sprint. The mountain terrain was treacherous, loose rocks, hidden roots, sudden drops that could break an ankle or worse. But Tom navigated it like he was born to these hills. And somehow Elena kept pace despite the weight of the iron around her wrists. They climbed steadily, using deer paths and rocky outcrops that would hide their tracks. Tom's breathing was controlled, measured. He was used to this kind of physical exertion. Elena's lungs burned, but fear and determination drove her forward. "There's a cave system about a mile ahead," Tom said quietly as they paused behind a massive boulder. "We can lose them there if we can reach it." "Tom," Elena said, catching his arm as he prepared to move again, "why are you doing this? You don't know me. You could have just walked away." He looked at her for a long moment, this woman with tangled hair and a torn dress, iron shackles on her wrists and dirt on her face, yet somehow still beautiful in her courage. "My younger sister, Mary, was about your age when cholera took her back in Ohio," he said quietly. "If she had been in trouble, I would have wanted someone to help her." He paused. "Besides, a man's character isn't measured by what he does when people are watching. It's what he does when nobody would ever know." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't tears of fear this time. This man, this stranger, was risking everything for her based on nothing more than his own moral compass. "Contact!" The shout was closer now, perhaps only a few hundred yards behind them. They ran again, Tom leading them up a steep rocky slope that provided natural handholds, but would be difficult for horses to follow. Elena's muscles screamed in protest, but she pushed through the pain. Every step took them further from captivity, closer to freedom. The cave entrance was a narrow slash in the mountainside, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Tom had discovered it years ago while tracking an injured elk. The opening was wide enough for a person but too small for a horse, and it led to a network of caverns that extended deep into the mountain. "In here," Tom whispered, helping Elena squeeze through the opening. The interior was cool and dark, lit only by the fading daylight from the entrance. Tom led her carefully over the uneven floor to a larger chamber about 20 feet back from the opening. "We'll wait here until dark," he said, settling down beside her on the rocky floor. "They won't risk following us into these caves at night. Too easy to get lost or break a leg." Elena sank down gratefully, her body finally able to rest. But as the adrenaline faded, the reality of their situation hit her. She was free from immediate captivity, yes. But she was also alone in the wilderness with a man she'd known for less than a day, wearing iron shackles she couldn't remove. As if reading her thoughts, Tom said, "I know this is difficult. You have no reason to trust me completely, but I give you my word. I will get you safely back to your family." Elena studied his profile in the dim light. There was something inherently trustworthy about Thomas Mackenzie, something that went beyond his actions today. It was in the way he spoke to her, with respect, never talking down to her despite her current state. It was in the way he'd positioned himself between her and the cave entrance without making a show of it. "I do trust you," she said softly, surprising herself with the truth of it. "I don't know why, but I do." Tom turned to look at her, and in the shadows of the cave, Eleanor saw something flicker in his eyes, surprise, gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite name. Outside, they could hear the Brennan gang searching, their voices growing more frustrated as the trail went cold. But inside the cave saw her for the first time in 3 days, Elena Rodriguez felt truly safe. Neither of them knew that this moment, sitting together in the darkness, bound by shared danger and growing trust, would be the foundation of something that would transform both their lives forever. Chapter 4. Confessions in the dark hours passed in the cave as darkness settled over the mountain. The sounds of the search had gradually faded, replaced by the natural symphony of night, owls calling, wind whistling through the pines, and the distant howl of a coyote. Tom had fashioned a small fire using dry wood and kindling he kept in his pack, positioning it deep enough in the cave that no light would escape to betray their location. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the stone walls and provided welcome warmth as the mountain temperature dropped. Eleanor sat with her back against the cave wall, finally able to examine her injuries properly. The shackles had rubbed raw spots on her wrists, and her ankles bore similar marks from the chains Tom had broken, but she was alive, she was free, and she was safe. 3 things she hadn't been sure she'd ever experience again. "Here," Tom said, pulling a clean cloth from his pack and soaking it with water from his canteen. "Let me clean those wounds." Elena hesitated for a moment, then extended her hands. Tom's touch was gentle as he cleaned the dried blood and dirt from around the iron bands, his large fingers surprisingly deft. The intimate care in his actions sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "You've done this before," she observed. "Worked with injured animals mostly, sometimes the other lumberjacks when they got careless with their axes." He finished with her wrists and looked up at her. "How do you feel? Really?" Elena considered the question seriously. "Scared," she said honestly, "but also grateful, and something else I can't quite name." "Tell me about your family," Tom said, settling back against the opposite wall. "It'll help pass the time, and I'd like to know about the people who raised such a brave woman." Elena smiled at that, the first genuine smile she'd managed in days. "My father, Miguel Rodriguez, came to Colorado from New Mexico when I was just a baby. He wanted to build something for his family, something that would last. The ranch isn't large, but it's ours." "And your mother?" "Maria Santos Rodriguez. She's the strongest woman I know. When the drought hit 3 years ago and we almost lost everything, she's the one who kept us going. She taught me that a woman can be gentle and fierce at the same time." Elena's voice grew soft. "She'll be worried sick about me." Tom poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing upward. "What about you? What do you do on the ranch?" "Everything," Elena laughed. I can rope a calf, break a horse, keep books, and cook for a dozen hands during roundup. Papa says I have better business sense than most men he knows. He's not wrong, Tom said, and Eleanor caught something in his tone, respect, but also admiration. What about you? She asked. You mentioned Ohio and a war, the Civil War. Tom was quiet for so long that Elena thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with old pain. I enlisted when I was 18, thought it would be an adventure, a chance to see the world beyond our farm. He stared into the fire. 4 years later, I came home to find my parents dead from cholera and my sister Mary married to a man who drank away everything we'd built. Oh, Tom, Elena breathed. I tried to make it work, but every field, every fence post reminded me of what we'd lost, so I came west, looking for something cleaner, I suppose. Found these mountains and decided they were as good a place as any to start over. And you've been alone all these years? Tom looked at her then, and Elena saw something vulnerable in his expression. It seemed easier, safer. People you care about can be taken away so quickly. Elena understood. Loss had a way of making people build walls, of making them afraid to reach out again. But sitting here in the firelight, looking at this man who had risked everything to save her, she felt those walls were perhaps not as necessary as they seemed. Tom, she said quietly, may I ask you something? He nodded. When you saw me chained in that clearing, what did you feel? Tom was quiet for a moment, clearly considering his words carefully. Rage, he said finally, the kind of rage that burns white hot. But also recognition, I think. Recognition. I recognized a fighter, someone who hadn't given up despite everything that had been done to her, someone worth saving. He paused. Someone worth protecting. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that neither was quite ready to address directly. Eleanor felt her heart beating faster, and it wasn't from fear this time. The fire's burning low, Tom said, breaking the moment. We should rest. I'll take first watch. Tom, wait. Elena reached out and touched his arm as he started to move away. Thank you. Not just for saving me, but for seeing me, for treating me like a person when others saw only merchandise. Tom looked down at her hand on his arm, then back at her face. Elena, any man who looks at you and sees anything other than a remarkable woman is a fool. The sincerity in his voice made Elena's breath catch. She realized that somewhere between the forest clearing and this cave, between terror and safety, between despair and hope, something had fundamentally shifted inside her. She was falling in love with Thomas Mackenzie. The thought should have terrified her. She'd known him for less than 24 hours, and their circumstances were hardly normal, but instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, as if her heart had simply recognized something her mind was still catching up to. As Tom settled by the cave entrance to keep watch, Eleanor lay down by the dying fire and tried to sleep, but her mind kept returning to one thought. Tomorrow, if they successfully evaded the Brennan gang, Tom would take her home to her family. And then what? Would he disappear back into his solitary life in the mountains? Would she return to the ranch and try to pretend this had never happened? The thought of never seeing him again made her chest ache, in a way that had nothing to do with her physical injuries. Outside the cave, the night deepened, and Elena Rodriguez found herself facing a choice she had never expected to make. Chapter 5. At dusk, she knelt. Dawn broke gray and cold over the Colorado mountains. Tom had kept watch through the night, listening for any sign that the Brennan gang was still searching. But the forest remained quiet except for the natural sounds of morning, birds calling, a stream trickling somewhere in the distance, and the whisper of wind through pine boughs. Elena woke to find Tom silhouetted against the cave entrance, his rifle ready but relaxed. The sight of him standing guard over her sleep sent warmth flooding through her chest. Any sign of them? She asked softly. Nothing since midnight. I think they've given up the search, at least for now. Tom turned to face her, and Elena saw exhaustion in his eyes. He'd stayed awake all night protecting her. You should have woken me to take a turn watching. Tom shook his head. You needed the rest more than I did. They shared a simple breakfast of jerky and hardtack from Tom's pack, along with water from a spring he knew about deeper in the cave system. As they ate, they planned their route to Elena's family ranch. It's about a day's hard travel through rough country, Tom explained, sketching a rough map in the dirt with a stick. We'll stay off the main trails until we're closer to Pueblo. The Brennans might have men watching the roads. Elena nodded, but her heart felt heavy. A day's travel meant this would all be over soon. She would be reunited with her worried family, which should have filled her with joy. Instead, all she could think about was saying goodbye to Tom. They left the cave as the sun climbed higher, Tom leading them through terrain that seemed impossible to navigate. But he moved with the confidence of someone who knew every rock and tree, every hidden path and water source. Elena found herself studying his movements, memorizing the way he moved through his mountain home. By afternoon, they had covered impressive ground without seeing any sign of pursuit. Tom's plan to use the cave system and back trails had worked. They were well ahead of any search and approaching the settled areas around Pueblo. There, Tom said, as they crested a ridge. Below them, Eleanor could see the familiar sight of her family's ranch, the adobe house her father had built, the wooden corrals, the windmill that drew water from the deep well. Elena's heart leaped at the sight of home, but it was tempered by the knowledge that Tom would leave her here and return to his solitary life in the mountains. "Papa!" she called as they descended the final slope. Miguel Rodriguez burst from the house at the sound of his daughter's voice, followed by Elena's mother and brothers. The reunion was everything Elena had dreamed of during her captivity: tears, embraces, rapid-fire questions in Spanish and English. But even as she held her family close, Elena's eyes kept drifting to Tom, who stood apart from the family gathering, clearly preparing to leave. "This is Thomas Mackenzie," Elena said finally, stepping back from her family's embrace. "He saved my life. He risked everything to free me from the Brennan gang." Miguel Rodriguez was a proud man, but he didn't hesitate to embrace Tom with tears in his eyes. "Senor Mackenzie, my family owes you a debt we can never repay." "No debt necessary," Tom replied. "I'm just glad Elena is safe." "You must stay for dinner," Maria Rodriguez insisted. "It's the least we can do." Tom hesitated, glancing at Elena. "I should get back to my work." "Please," Elena said quietly, and something in her voice made Tom nod his acceptance. The evening that followed was both wonderful and heartbreaking for Elena. Her family welcomed Tom like a hero, and she could see him gradually relaxing in their warmth. He told stories of his work in the mountains, listened patiently to her younger brothers, excited questions, and complimented her mother's cooking with genuine appreciation. But Elena also saw him preparing to leave, the way he kept his hat nearby, the polite distance he maintained despite their hospitality, the careful way he avoided her eyes when she looked at him too long. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Tom stood and reached for his hat. "I should be going," he said. "I want to reach my cabin before full dark." Eleanor's heart clenched. This was it. After everything they'd shared, everything they'd been through together, he was just going to walk away. "Tom," she said, following him outside as her family finished clearing the dinner dishes. He stopped and turned to face her in the gathering dusk. "Elena, I don't," she said, stepping closer. "Don't say goodbye like this was just some chance encounter. Don't pretend that what happened between us doesn't matter." Tom's carefully maintained composure cracked. "Elena, what happened between us? It does matter. More than I expected. More than I wanted it to." "Then why are you leaving?" "Because you have a life here, a family who loves you, a home, a future. I have nothing to offer you but a cabin in the mountains, and a man who's forgotten how to be anything but alone." Elena stepped closer, close enough to see the pain in his blue eyes. "What if I don't want the life I had before? What if meeting you changed everything?" "Elena," Tom's voice was rough with emotion. "I've been thinking all day about what my life was like before the Brennans took me. It was good, but it was small, safe, predictable." She reached up and touched his face gently. "You showed me what courage looks like, what it means to risk everything for what's right. You made me feel like I could be more than I ever imagined." "You are more than you ever imagined. You always were. Then let me prove it." Elena stepped back and, to Tom's shock, sank to her knees in the dirt of her family's yard. "Thomas Mackenzie, I'm asking you to let me stay with you, not because I owe you my life, but because I want to share my life with you." "Elena, get up," Tom said, reaching for her hands. Not until you answer me. I know it's crazy. I know we've only known each other for 2 days, but I also know that I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. I know that the thought of never seeing you again makes me feel like I can't breathe." Tom pulled her to her feet, his hands shaking slightly. "You're asking me to take you away from everything you know. I'm asking you to take me to everything I want to know. I'm asking you to let me build something new with you, something that's ours." Tom stared at her for a long moment, this extraordinary woman who had endured captivity and torture and emerged stronger, who was now offering to leave her comfortable life to build something unknown with him. "Are you sure?" he asked finally. "Really sure? Because if you come with me, there's no going back. Life in the mountains is hard, Eleanor. Lonely. Dangerous." Eleanor smiled, the same brave smile he'd first seen in the forest clearing. "Thomas Mackenzie, I've been chained and hunted and terrorized. I think I can handle whatever the mountains throw at me, especially if I'm not facing it alone." Tom looked at her kneeling there in the dust, this remarkable woman who was choosing him over everything safe and familiar, and felt something break open in his chest, something that had been locked away since he'd lost his family all those years ago. "Yeah," he said simply. "Yes, I want you to stay with me." Elena rose and threw her arms around his neck, and as Tom held her close in the gathering darkness, he realized that for the first time in 8 years, he wasn't going to be alone. Inside the house, Miguel and Maria Rodriguez watched through the window as their daughter embraced her future. They would miss her terribly, but they could see the love in her eyes, the determination in her posture. Their Elena had always been meant for something bigger than their small ranch could contain. 3 months later, in a small church in Pueblo, Elena Rodriguez became Elena Mackenzie, and in the years that followed, their mountain cabin became a home filled with laughter, love, and eventually, the voices of children who would grow up knowing that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single act of courage. Tom never did finish cutting that section of forest where he'd first heard the sound of Elena's chains. He said it was too special a place to disturb. Instead, he built a small bench there, where he and Elena would often sit in the evenings, watching the sunset over the mountains and remembering the day their lives changed forever. The sound of chains had led him to her, but it was the sound of her voice, asking him to stay forever, that had truly set them both free. The end.